Thank you, everyone, from the South African Chamber of Commerce. What we are gathered here for is what really makes or breaks societies. It's important to look at creating value and not looking at Africa as a place of negation, but as a place of opportunities.
It's really fantastic to be here for a number of reasons, but one is, as Farai said, I testified at the Zondo Commission in 2021 for 2 full days, 23rd and 24th of March 2021. And soon thereafter, because of the threats I faced, I had to leave South Africa. I came into the UK in exile. I didn't seek asylum, I didn't come as a refugee, but I just came here because I couldn't be in South Africa. Left alone, left my family behind, left my career, my community all behind, and came to the UK. And what is most shocking for me is that upon that experience was just how the business community in South Africa just abandoned me. Right? I'd worked in South Africa as head of strategy for a financial services company. I was a partner at a management consulting firm. And the Tutu Foundation said something publicly in my support, the Helen Suzman Foundation did, but no one else. The first organization to publicly support me for what I did was the South African Chamber of Commerce UK. Because in 2022, I received the Chairman's Award for public service. And so this organization will always be dear to me because you cannot imagine the power of having an organization sort of, hold you up when everything around you is being challenged, ripped down. So when Juliet said, you've got to come in, speak, I said, what time, how long, right? I'm there. So wonderful to be here for that reason. So the other reason I'm excited to be here, because I want to, in many ways, rethink some aspects of business, some aspects of capitalism. And it's become quite in vogue these days to reimagine capitalism and rethink capitalism. And I'm not going to join that parade, but I want to take a few probes into this idea of business and capitalism around this question of, can business bridge this South African divide? And I've been seeing more and more research on what psychologists and social anthropologists call stupid people. Their terminology, right? And they define stupid people as people who are unable to process complexity, right? So they will err on the side of seeking simplistic answers when there's complexity. And particularly they're researching why it is in the world that stupid people actually often run the world, right? Think of your bosses, think of your local council. Your local councillor, and into his country, in even presidents, right? But what's interesting about this, again, this research says the reason stupid people, by this definition, are running the world is because the world is so complex, right? And so in complexity, it's interesting that stupid people rule. Because if everyone's looking for simple answers to complexity, the smart people among us are not giving these simple answers. It's the stupid people who are giving the simple answers, right? So let me say that again. So in a world of complexity, as opposed to spending the time thinking through the complexity, the nuances of it, when we want simple answers, right, the smart people aren't offering simple answers, the stupid people are. And this is part of why these psychologists explain why stupid people are ruling the world. Now, it's one of my objectives to kind of show I'm not one of those stupid people, and I might fail. I also don't want to treat you as those stupid people, so I won't give any simplistic answers to our very vexing question of, can business bridge this divide? Because I think it's a complex question, and in fact, if in 20 minutes I'm going to assess these social divides, I'm going to trivialize the issue and actually just rattle off a string of cliches, so I won't do that. But what I do want to offer is a few thoughts and provocations around this question of the role business ought to play in a society that's fragile, in a society that's cracking in many aspects, as South Africa is, as well as many other societies around the world. Right? So we ask the question, we see the crisis in society, And the question is, who ought to do something, right? And in particular, what ought business to do if we think business ought to do something? What ought business to do? Now, South Africa is complex in this way because we've got BE, broad Black economic empowerment. We've got codes around these things, and so there's a tendency or temptation to say, "Oh, we've got that covered, right? As long as business just follows the set of rules and codes, right? Business has got it covered." And I want to suggest part of this idea of rethinking. We set aside what the codes and the Black economic empowerment regime calls for, and let's think about it again. Because I think in many ways people are saying to throw out those codes, but then what replaces it? So that's what we're trying to do. I'm worried you cut off, and so half the chair is blocking your face. This lady in front.
No, I can see.
You can see me. Okay. Okay. I'll move this. I can see you.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and the perspective I'm coming from is I teach at the Oxford Business School, the Science Business School, and all of the issues I look at, I use a lens, a sort of interlaid, crossover lens, overlapping lens of business and moral philosophy. So when I talk about ethics, I'm talking about ethics in a very broad sense of what moral philosophy might talk about ethics. But that's the lens I'm coming at this. So I'm going to offer you 5 thoughts around this issue of social ills in South Africa and what business ought to do. I think the first one, and I've said the provocations, and so we can debate them in the Q&A afterwards. The first one I think is that my view is that in South Africa, most of the blame, if we are apportioning blame, has to be laid at the feet of government in terms of looking at the social divide in South Africa, right? Why would I say that? It's linked to this idea of what government's role is in society, right? We as citizens give up some of our power, our freedom to the state, and in return, we expect the state to provide the right environment, the right structure, the right institutions to protect our human rights, to protect the way we live. Now, we could ask ourselves, is the state in South Africa doing that? When we've got between 40 and 60% youth unemployment, where you've got sexual violence on an epidemic scale. And in many ways, we'd argue the South African state is not protecting South Africans' human rights. It's not providing an environment in which South Africans can thrive. I started a youth literacy organization 12 years ago called Read to Rise. And we work in the Cape Flats where I grew up with 7 and 8-year-olds. Now, international assessment of South Africa's 8-year-olds states that 81% of our 8-year-olds cannot read for comprehension, right? 80%. 4 out of 5 8-year-olds today in South Africa, that's the average, right, cannot read for comprehension. That means in some areas of our country, 100% of the kids can't read for comprehension. Now, again, I put it to you that in a world of thinking of capitalism, of people come together, willing trader, willing buyer, willing seller, if the person on the other end of that transaction can't even read, right, they can't read the contract, they can't educate themselves if they can't read. They can't read their medicine prescription, right? We can't say then that those, that we are upholding their human rights. And so in many cases, I want to argue that I'm arguing that government in South Africa is to blame for the social ills and social divides. That doesn't mean that business and individuals are blameless, but I certainly think, right, that governments would create this right environment, right? So first point, I'm laying a lot of the blame at government. Now what government does is they come to business and they say, look, I'm failing in feeding children, I'm failing in educating children, help. And that's been happening for the last 30 years in South Africa, it happens in other parts of the world. And so what does business go and do? We go and paint classrooms and build vegetable gardens and print books for kids. And I think that's mistaken. So we need to, as business, separate out charity from what our obligation is. If you want to go and paint classrooms as charity, then absolutely go ahead. But we've got to think about what our responsibility is as business. What is our responsibility in an environment where the state is failing? So when the state is either unable to, and in South Africa's case, often unwilling to, uphold the institutions of justice, what is our responsibility? For me, that's the key question. It's not about upholding codes, it's what is our responsibility in that environment. And I'm going to suggest we as business have this obligation of stepping in when government is failing to uphold the institutions in our society. I'm going to offer two quick reasons. One reason is that often business has the capacity to do something, right? Business often has the power to do something. And the simple intuition for this is, if I'm walking along, this is the beach in Cape Town, and I see someone drowning, right? And we look around, there's 5 of us looking around seeing the child drowning. And we say, shit, crisis, right? Who should go in, right? And I go, geez, I can't swim. Next to me, someone in a wheelchair, right? And then there's one guy who's an Olympic swimmer, right? Amongst the 5 of us, who might we think ought to go in first to save the child, right? We might think is the person most able to go and save the child, right? So the idea of effectiveness in this mission, we've looked at the person who is most able to do it. And this is one of the arguments why we might say business ought to step in when governments are failing, because often we can argue business has the capacity, whether it's through financial resources or human resources, to do something, right? So one argument is business ought to do something because of its capacity. But a second argument I would suggest for why business ought to step in when governments are failing is that often businesses participate in those injustices we see, right? Not more controversial here, so I will start getting the taxi ready outside so I can leave very quickly, right? And so what I'm suggesting here in my child drowning example is, right, that we're the ones actually pushing the child into the water, right? Or part of this process that causes the child to end up in the water drowning. And then we stand back and say, geez, who should fix that? And so I'm suggesting that those involved in causing the social divide or the social ills in society bear responsibility, not a charitable cause, but an actual moral responsibility that ought to be upheld in society to address that, right? Now, I love the language we use in business. We've developed beautiful language over the last few decades, right? Think about the language of business and society. There's business and here's society, right? Think of the language of public sector with accountability and transparency, and private sector where we operate where we owe no one any accountability, right? The language of, Athol isn't a dodgy guy, he's street smart, right? Or he's he's got great business acumen, right? Which actually means he's just kind of screwing his customers just a little bit, right? Right? He's an astute negotiator. So we've developed a language that in many ways sets us as business people apart from society. So in society, we might say you've always got to be honest. In business, we say, well, as long as you don't lie, you can withhold information, that's okay, right? As long as you don't lie. So we've created, I suggest. So when I say we participate in these social ills, we participated as business in many ways, right? Firstly, we often look at these issues from the outside. Think about your boardrooms, your meetings, right? We're the good guys trying to solve some social problem, right? Government's incompetent, these people are incompetent. We're the heroes flying in, right, to go and save them. It's very different if you accept that we caused it for them to be there. Now we're not heroes, right? Now we actually owe them something. And that becomes very difficult for a lot of us as individuals and as business to accept. So, if government's failing, business bears a responsibility to step in because of the capacity and because of their participation in these issues. But of course, you're going to say to me, but Athol, right, I don't know what you guys are teaching there at Oxford, but corporate purpose, we've got fiduciary duty, we've got shareholder responsibility, our purpose is one of maximizing profit, right? How does that then square with this idea you're telling me that we've got a responsibility to deal with these social issues, right? And I want to think about that for a second, right? So, and you guys again will see, companies use these wonderful words, their values. I love values because every company on earth uses the same set of values because we've run out of ideas, right? What are your values? Integrity, right? Transparency, diversity, right? Now, what's interesting, I do this in my classes. I put up a list of values, and I get the students to guess which company it was, or the values belong to, right? So I put up integrity, transparency, trust, respect, and they guess Patagonia, and they guess, and I said, no, it's Enron, right? So Enron's values were integrity, respect, all those things. So this idea of kind of saying, well, we're values-based is meaningless unless you define what those values are, and importantly, clarify what you put them in tension with, right? I'm a very good, honest person until I'm late for a meeting, and then I'm going to cut in traffic and speed, right? So just saying I'm honest is meaningless. You say I'm honest no matter what, right? My business has integrity, even if it costs us contracts, right? I haven't seen any websites sort of making those sort of statements. So the same with this idea of purpose. Well, we're purpose-driven. What can be more what's your purpose? Right? I keep saying Hitler had purpose. Every gangster I know has got great purpose. They're also very inspired leaders. They're also values-based. And their values are just values we don't like. But they've got values and they've got purpose. So just saying we've got purpose, for me, is meaningless. But we then go and say, no, but our purpose is maximizing profit, right? And even someone from Wharton, someone mentioned from Wharton, I forget who it was, but Eric Orts, who's a professor at Wharton, kind of questions that idea of why should business only have one purpose? We're talking this complexity, right? So everyone says profits and ignore everything else. Why not have two purposes, right? If business is so complex, maybe I can have two purposes. I certainly think when I meet entrepreneurs, and many of you are, when you wake up in the morning, we talk about your business, right? You talk about the customers you're going to serve, the problems you're going to solve, the products you're going to create, the services you're creating. That's what gets business people excited, right? And yet we say the purpose of business is profit. So I think the purpose of business is actually to serve society, because we are part of society, right? It's not just business and society, it's business in society. We use public infrastructure, we employ each other, we shape society's tastes, we take society as customers and as labor, right? Business is part of society. I'm a person before I'm a business person, right? I think you are the same. I think you're a person before you're a business person. And I don't know about you, I keep having these conversations. People say, but Athol, from a business perspective, what does it mean? How about from a human perspective, right? So you challenge me on the purpose. And let's say I accept your argument that the purpose of business is to maximize profit, right? And one of the godfathers of this is Milton Friedman, the American economist. So Friedman won a Nobel Prize for his arguments around, obviously, economics, but arguing for free market capitalism, right? And corporate executives love quoting Friedman, because Friedman in 1970 said that he accepts, and we should accept, that companies have got moral responsibility. So he doesn't deny moral responsibility, but he says that moral responsibility is to maximize profit, right? So he sort of does a judo move on me, where I'm saying, no, but you've got moral responsibility. Absolutely. Let's define that moral responsibility. That moral responsibility is to maximize profit, right? So people say, okay, 1 for Friedman, 0 for Williams. Then Friedman goes further in saying, and making an argument, that the responsibility of companies and executives is to satisfy the needs of shareholders, right? We, as managers, ought to do what shareholders want because they employ us and they own the company. And he says shareholders want to maximize profit, and that's what managers should do, right? 2 for Friedman, 0 for Williams. But then go further down, and this is the part that most executives ignore because they quote the first 2. Friedman very clearly says, maximize profit while, right? While conforming to the basic rules of society, right? And he goes further to define the 2 areas of basic rules of society. One is law, and the second is ethical custom. His words, ethical custom. So what's Friedman saying? Friedman's saying, fully support capitalism, but there are constraints. This is exactly what Adam Smith said, right? Adam Smith wasn't an economist. We were talking the invisible hand. He was a moral philosopher. And Adam Smith, similar to Friedman, is saying, right, we support free market capitalism, but with constraints, with legal and moral constraints. And so what we've done with capitalism over the last few decades is take the first part of this argument and ignore the second part. And so there are a lot of us trying to remind executives that capitalism doesn't need to be reformed. We're not actually performing, we're not executing capitalism. The thing we're doing isn't capitalism. We're doing some half part of capitalism. Because capitalism in its design says there are constraints, legal and ethical constraints. And so yes, we've got a job of defining what those constraints are. But this idea of unfettered, laissez-faire capitalism, maximize profit at all costs, is our modern interpretation of something that suits our purpose. And so that is sort of my argument around how we need to think about what our responsibilities are. Let there be light. And so what ought business to do if you buy that argument? And I certainly don't think you should buy it, we should debate it. I think two things we need to think about as business. One is, in this context of failing state, I think our job is not to go and paint classrooms and build vegetable patches. We can do that as a form of charity. I think our responsibility is to rebuild and shore up those institutions. And this is the irony of state capture in South Africa, right? Of what I try to fight, was the very companies who had the capabilities to actually help shore up our state institutions to resist state capture were the ones who participated in the state capture, and so weakened it even further and exploited it and profited from it. And this is why I, as an individual, was willing to stand up and say, you've got to be kidding me, not on my watch, right? Not as a citizen, not as someone who understood what was going on, and had evidence to prove it. I gave this Honour Commission 700 pages of documents with names and details of 39 people involved in state capture. All of them are still walking free in South Africa, living large, vetoing me from board appointments, vetoing me from honorary doctorates. I was a professor at a South African university, was told to leave, right? Because these 39 are still walking free. So the first thing I think we've got to do as I wrap up is, I think business has to rethink its role, not painting classrooms, as fun as that is, but as to actually think about how do we shore up, how do we hold government more accountable and use our economic power to do so. The second thing I urge business to think about is to drop this fixed mindset. I think we keep saying, how can we fix these social problems, right? I mean, I wrote this. Can we bridge the divide? I think the best thing business can do is not be fixing problems, but stop doing the things that cause these problems. Imagine that. Now, it's not sexy doing that. There's no pictures to take, right? The annual report and website and the CSI brochure is boring if you stop doing things causing harm. But that's the most impactful thing you can do. Just pay people fair wage. Stop manipulating customers. Stop lying to customers. Right? Stop polluting, stop exploiting, stop using sourcing products from areas where there are sweatshops. So I leave you with those thoughts around a way to think about our role as business in society and also our role as individuals. Again, this point around I'm a person before I'm a business person, and I'm not going to use my business as a shield to set aside my moral convictions, because I think that's what leads to the social. Thank you.